As the remnants of the Alliance fleet settled into their berths around Xenvoria, repairs began in earnest. Engineers and mechanics from all across the galaxy swarmed over the wounded ships, patching hulls, recharging shields, and recalibrating weapon systems. The hangar bays of the Phoenix buzzed with activity as crews worked to bring their war machines back to fighting condition. The mood among the survivors was grim but resolute. There was no time to celebrate. The galaxy was still in grave danger. Admiral Samuel Crowe stood alone in the observation deck of the Phoenix, looking down at the planet below. The lights of Xenvoria City shimmered like a sea of stars against the planet's surface. But even the beauty of his homeworld couldn't shake the dark thoughts clouding his mind. The unseen enemy had been pushed back, but they were far from defeated. Somewhere out there, in the uncharted reaches of space, they were regrouping, adapting and preparing for their next assault. "Admiral," came the familiar voice of Captain Lauren as she stepped into the room, her face a mask of determination. "We've received an urgent transmission from the Anaun High Command. They've detected unusual energy signatures at the edge of the Corvac's nebula. They believe it could be a sign of a larger enemy presence." Crowe turned to face her, his eyes narrowing. "The Corvac's nebula, that's well beyond our current patrol routes. If the unseen enemy is building up their forces there, we're looking at another invasion point." Lauren nodded. "The Anaun are sending scouts, but they're requesting our immediate assistance. They believe this could be the start of a second wave, Admiral." Crowe's jaw tightened. The first wave had nearly destroyed them, and if the enemy was indeed preparing for a renewed assault, they couldn't afford to be caught off guard again. "Prepare the fleet," he ordered. "We're heading to the Corvac's nebula." The journey to the Corvac's nebula took the Phoenix and its flotilla through the dark, uncharted regions of space. As they approached the nebula, a dense cloud of swirling gases filled the view screen, glowing with an eerie, almost malevolent light. The nebula was a treacherous place, filled with electromagnetic storms and gravitational distortions that made navigation nearly impossible for ordinary vessels. Entering the outer edge of the nebula, Lauren reported, her hand steady on the console. "We're picking up faint energy readings, definitely not natural." "Full sensor sweep," Crowe commanded. "I want to know exactly what we're dealing with." The sensor arrays of the Phoenix lit up, scanning the depths of the nebula. What they found was far worse than Crowe had anticipated. Hidden within the swirling mists were hundreds of enemy signatures, ships of the unseen enemy, but larger and more advanced than any they had faced before. Their twisted forms seemed to blend with the energy of the nebula, their hulls pulsing like living organisms. "Admiral," Lauren said, her voice strained, "this isn't just a fleet. It's a construction site. They're building something massive." Crowe's blood ran cold as he stared at the sensor readings. The enemy was constructing a colossal structure in the heart of the nebula, some kind of station or weapon platform that dwarfed even the largest ships in the Terranian fleet. "What is that thing?" one of the bridge officers muttered, fear creeping into their voice. Crowe's mind raced as he analyzed the structure's design. The energy output was off the charts, and it seemed to be drawing power directly from the nebula itself, harnessing its raw electromagnetic storms as a fuel source. "They're building a subspace rift generator," Crowe realized aloud. "They're planning to open a gateway, bring in their forces directly from wherever they came from." The implications hit the bridge crew like a shockwave. If the unseen enemy could open a stable rift, they could flood the galaxy with their entire armada in a matter of hours. The battle at Drelkin would seem like a skirmish in comparison. "We can't let that happen," Crowe said, his voice hard and determined. "If they activate that rift generator, the galaxy won't survive the onslaught." "Prepare all ships for immediate assault," Crowe ordered. "We'll hit that rift generator with everything we've got. Inform the Anaun and the Alliance to join us. We're taking this thing down." As the Phoenix moved into attack position, the Terranian and Alliance ships followed suit, forming a tight battle formation. Moments later, the elegant, crystalline vessels of the Anaun emerged from the shadows, their weapon systems glowing with an intense light. The unseen enemy seemed to sense the incoming threat. Their ships surged out of the nebula like dark shadows, forming a defensive perimeter around the rift generator. The battle that erupted was more intense than anything the galaxy had yet seen. The Terranian fleet opened fire with a torrent of plasma torpedoes and energy beams tearing into the enemy lines. The Unbeknownst ships unleashed devastating volleys of crystalline projectiles, their attacks slicing through the darkened hulls of the enemy vessels with surgical precision. Alliance ships, battered and bruised, fought with a fierce determination, refusing to yield even an inch. The unseen enemy responded with unrelenting ferocity. Their ships adapted to the attacks, their hulls shifting and morphing as they absorbed the incoming fire and retaliated with beams of searing energy that ripped through the fabric of space itself. Terranian and Alliance vessels exploded in blinding flashes of light, debris scattering into the void. "Focus all the fire on the rift generator," Crow shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "We need to stop it from powering up." The Phoenix led the charge, its cannons unleashing a continuous barrage of concentrated plasma directly at the core of the rift generator. The Unbeknownst vessels converged on the target as well, their weapons glowing with a blinding intensity. The massive structure shuddered under the assault, cracks forming along its surface as the combined firepower began to take its toll. "Admiral, the generator's power levels are spiking," Lauren warned. "They're trying to activate it." Crow's eyes narrowed. "We're out of time. All ships prepare for a full power strike on my mark. We have to disable that." As the fleet prepared for its final, desperate assault, the rift generator pulsed with dark energy, its core glowing like the heart of a dying star. Space itself seemed to warp and twist around it, and a faint tear in the fabric of reality began to form. A subspace rift that threatened to open wide and unleash devastation upon the galaxy. "All ships, fire!" Crow commanded, his voice carrying the weight of a galaxy's hope. The Phoenix unleashed its full arsenal, every cannon and missile bay firing in unison. The Unbeknownst ships joined in, their crystalline projectiles converging on the rift generator like arrows of light. Alliance vessels, their hulls scorched and damaged, poured every ounce of their firepower into the target. The rift generator groaned under the combined onslaught, its structure cracking and splintering. Energy flared from its core, unstable and uncontrolled. With a deafening explosion, the generator's core imploded, collapsing in on itself and taking the subspace rift with it. A shockwave rippled through the nebula, scattering the enemy ships in all directions. Without the power of the hive mind to guide them, the remaining vessels faltered, their coordination shattered. The Terranian and Alliance forces pressed the advantage, cutting down the disoriented enemy ships until the last of them was destroyed. As the dust settled and the last remnants of the enemy fleet drifted into oblivion, the nebula fell silent. The rift generator was gone, its threat neutralized for now. But Crow knew that the unseen enemy was far from defeated. They had bought the galaxy time, but the enemy would be back, stronger, smarter, and more determined to break through the defenses that held them at bay. "We did it," Lauren said softly, relief evident in her voice as she turned to Crow. "We stopped the rift generator." Crow nodded, but his expression remained grim. "This isn't over," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "We may have closed one door, but the unseen enemy will find another way, and when they do, we need to be ready." The Phoenix and its battered fleet set a course back to Zanvoria, the fires of battle still fresh in their minds. As they moved away from the Corvac's nebula, Crow couldn't shake the feeling that this victory was only temporary, that the unseen enemy was far from done with them. But even as the darkness loomed, Crow knew one thing for certain. They had allies now. The Terranians, the Unbeknownst, the Alliance, they were no longer fighting alone. And as long as they stood together, they still had a chance to turn the tide. The battered fleet had returned to Zanvoria, the heart of the Galactic Alliance, and the aftermath of the Corvac's Nebula battle weighed heavily on every soul. Though they had destroyed the rift generator and forced the unseen enemy to retreat, there was little cause for celebration. The victory felt hollow, a mere postponement of the inevitable, and everyone knew that the galaxy was living on borrowed time. Admiral Samuel Crow stood on the observation deck of the Phoenix, staring at the planet below. The lights of Zanvoria's bustling metropolis seemed dimmer now, their glow muted by the grim reality that hung over the galaxy. He could see the rebuilding efforts in the shipyards, crews working around the clock to repair the damaged vessels, their silhouettes moving like ants across the hulls of crippled warships. A soft chime broke the silence, and Captain Lauren entered the room. She paused, seeing the weariness etched into Crow's features, but her own eyes carried a hint of urgency. "Admiral, you need to see this," she said, holding out a datapad. Crow took the device and frowned as he skimmed the contents. It was a report from the Anun High Command, detailing strange anomalies detected in the farthest reaches of the galaxy. Energy signatures similar to those of the unseen enemy had been detected, only this time they were different, smaller, subtler, like whispers in the dark. "These signals, they're not like the others," Crow said, narrowing his eyes. "They're fragmented, isolated." Lauren nodded, her face grave. The Anun believe these might be remnants of the hive mind, scattered elements left behind when we destroyed the rift generator. "They're trying to re-establish a connection, Admiral, to regroup." Crow's jaw clenched. The idea of the enemy reassembling itself, like shattered pieces of glass reforming into a blade, filled him with a renewed sense of urgency. The unseen enemy was more than just a threat. It was a parasite, constantly adapting and evolving, determined to survive at any cost. "We need to hunt these remnants down," Crow said, his voice hard as steel. "We can't give them a chance to grow stronger again. If we let even a fragment survive, it will come back to haunt us." The source of the anomalies led them to the Zarnak cluster, a remote region of space shrouded in mystery and superstition. Legends spoke of abandoned worlds and ancient ruins hidden within the swirling gas clouds and treacherous asteroid fields of the cluster. Few ventured into its depths, and fewer still returned. Crow stood on the bridge of the Phoenix, watching the star map display as they approached the cluster's edge. The Anun had sent one of their most advanced scouting ships ahead, and its readings confirmed the presence of something unnatural, lurking within the dense nebula. "Entering the Zarnak cluster," Lauren announced. "Sensors are detecting faint energy signatures, but they're fluctuating. It's almost like they're trying to cloak themselves." "That's the hive mind trying to hide," Crow said. "It knows we're coming." The Phoenix moved into the cluster, its shields raised to full power as they navigated through the thick veil of gas and debris. Strange flickering lights danced in the darkness outside the viewport, twisted reflections caused by the cluster's erratic magnetic fields. The silence was unnerving, as if the stars themselves were holding their breath. "Admiral, I'm picking up movement," one of the sensor officers said, her voice tense. Multiple signatures closing in fast. Crow's eyes locked on the screen as blips appeared, emerging from the darkness of the cluster. Dozens of enemy ships, smaller and more agile than those they had faced at the Corvac's nebula, raced toward the Phoenix and its escort fleet. "All hands to battle stations," Crow ordered. "Engage those targets before they can organize." The bridge of the Phoenix buzzed with activity as the crew sprang into action. The ship's cannons roared to life, firing streams of plasma and energy beams at the incoming enemy vessels. The smaller enemy ships darted through the chaos, their movements fast and unpredictable, like shadows flitting through the night. The battle was intense and close quarters. The enemy ships weaved in and out of the Phoenix's fire, their hulls shimmering as they absorbed damage, adapting to each hit. Unlike before, these ships didn't seem to be controlled by a central mind. They were more feral, like disconnected fragments acting on instinct. "They're not coordinated," Lauren observed. "They're attacking wildly without a unified strategy." Crow's mind raced as he watched the chaotic fight unfold. "That's because they're not fully connected to the hive mind anymore," he said. "They're acting like wounded animals, desperate and dangerous." The Terranian and Alliance ships took advantage of this disarray. Using their superior technology and firepower, they cut through the enemy vessels one by one, blasting them apart with precise strikes. The Anun ships glided through the battlefield with an almost ghostly grace, their crystalline weapons tearing the enemy apart with a brilliance that lit up the dark cluster. Crow stood on the bridge of the Phoenix, watching the star map display as they approached the cluster's edge. The Anun had sent one of their most advanced scouting ships ahead, and its readings confirmed the presence of something unnatural, lurking within the dense nebula. "Admiral, we've located the source of the energy signature," Lauren said, her tone carrying a note of surprise. "It's not a ship, it's a structure." The Phoenix's scanners focused on a distant object hidden within the gas clouds. As they drew closer, a massive structure came into view, an ancient installation, partially buried within a shattered asteroid. The design was unlike anything Crow had ever seen, its surface etched with strange symbols that glowed faintly in the darkness. "That's not unseen enemy technology," Crow said, frowning. "It's something older, much older." The Anun emissary, Tethon, appeared on the comm screen, his expression unreadable. "This is an ancient gateway," he said, "built by a civilization long before the rise of the unseen enemy. It's a relic of a forgotten war, a weapon designed to close the rifts between galaxies." "A gateway?" Crow echoed. "So this is what they were looking for. A way to re-establish their link to the other side." "Yes," Tethon replied. "They were trying to reactivate this gateway to summon their forces once more. But now that we know its location, we can ensure it remains dormant." Crow's gaze hardened as he stared at the ancient gateway, its surface glowing with a cold blue light. This relic, this artifact from a lost age, held the key to either their salvation or their destruction. "We can't just leave it here," Crow said. "If the unseen enemy returns, they'll try to use it again." Tethon's eyes glowed with an otherworldly light. "Then we must destroy it," he said. "But we must do so with caution. Its power is beyond our understanding, and any miscalculation could tear a hole in the fabric of space." Crow nodded. "We'll need to coordinate with the Anun High Command and the Alliance Council. We can't afford any mistakes. This gateway has to be dismantled, piece by piece." As the Phoenix withdrew from the Zarnak cluster, Crow knew that the battle against the unseen enemy was far from over. The shadows on the horizon were growing longer, and the stakes were higher than ever. The ancient gateway was a reminder that the galaxy's enemies were not just born from the present, but were echoes from a distant past. Echoes that threatened to rise again. The discovery of the ancient gateway in the Zarnak cluster had shaken Admiral Samuel Crow to his core. The relic's existence hinted at a history long buried, at battles fought and lost in ages past. Crow knew that they were standing on the brink of a storm greater than anything they'd faced before. The unseen enemy was more than just a menace. It was a cosmic force that had threatened the galaxy in the distant past and was poised to do so again. As the Phoenix returned to Zanvoria, the mood aboard the ship was tense. The urgency of the situation was felt by every member of the crew. Crow knew they couldn't afford to rest on their victory at the Zarnak cluster. The gateway might have been disabled, but the unseen enemy was still out there, lurking, waiting for another opportunity. "Admiral," came the voice of Captain Lauren, her face stern as she approached Crow on the bridge. "We've received a priority transmission from the Alliance Council. They want an immediate update on our findings in the Zarnak cluster. And there's something else. A signal has been detected. It's broadcasting on an old Terranian frequency." Crow turned to her, a spark of recognition in his eyes. "A Terranian frequency? Are you sure?" "Positive," Lauren said, handing him a datapad. "It's coming from deep within the Valar expanse, an uncharted region at the far edge of the galaxy. It's weak, but it's consistent. The Anun have already confirmed that it matches known Terranian patterns." Crow's mind raced. If there was a Terranian signal out there, it could mean one of two things. Either a hidden Terranian outpost had somehow survived all this time, or the unseen enemy was using Terranian technology against them. Either way, they had to investigate. "Prepare the fleet," Crow ordered. "We're heading to the Valar expanse. I want to know what's out there, and I want to know now." The Valar expanse was a place few dared to venture. Its vast regions were filled with chaotic energy storms, gravity wells, and rogue planets drifting through the darkness like lost souls. Navigating the expanse was a perilous journey, even for the advanced ships of the Terranian fleet. But Crow was determined to find the source of the signal. As the Phoenix and its escort ships entered the expanse, the swirling storms of gas and radiation created a haunting landscape. The nebula around them crackled with electric blue energy, casting shadows that seemed to twist and flicker as if alive. "Admiral, we're approaching the source of the signal," Lauren said, her voice tense. "It's coming from a celestial body, an asteroid field at the heart of the expanse." Crow's eyes narrowed as the ship's sensors focused on the target. There, amidst the tumbling rocks and debris, was a hidden structure. A massive derelict station lay partially embedded within a large asteroid. Its design was unmistakably Terranian, but it was ancient, far older than any installation Crow had ever seen. "What is this place?" Lauren whispered, staring at the structure in awe. Crow didn't answer. He had a sinking feeling in his chest, a whisper from the past echoing in his mind. The station looked like a relic from the Exodus War, the conflict that had driven the Terranians to abandon their homeworlds centuries ago. "Take us in closer," Crow ordered, "and be ready for anything." The Phoenix approached the station cautiously, its lights sweeping over the crumbling hull. The markings on the structure were faded, but as they drew near, Crow could make out the symbol of the Terranian 7th Fleet, a unit that was believed to have been lost to time during the Exodus War. The station appeared dead, its power systems offline, its corridors dark. "We're picking up faint life signs inside," Lauren said, checking the readings. "But they're scattered and weak." Crow's heart skipped a beat. Life signs on a station this old? It seemed impossible. And yet here they were, standing on the brink of a discovery that could change everything. "Prepare a boarding team," Crow said. "We're going in." Clad in armored exosuits, Crow led the boarding team onto the ancient station. As they stepped through the airlock, their boots echoed against the cold metal floor. The inside of the station was a graveyard of the past. Faded banners bearing the Terranian insignia hung tattered on the walls, and old control panels flickered with dying lights. "Stay alert," Crow warned, his voice steady but tense. "Something isn't right here." As they moved deeper into the station, they found signs of a fierce battle. Scorch marks scarred the walls, and twisted pieces of machinery lay strewn across the floor. The silence was broken only by the occasional flicker of malfunctioning lights. Suddenly, a movement caught Crow's eye, a shadow shifting in the corner of the room. He raised his weapon, signaling the team to hold their position. "Identify yourself," Crow called out. From the darkness emerged a figure, clad in a battered, faded Terranian uniform. The man's eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, his face gaunt and haunted. He looked at Crow with a mix of desperation and relief. You're Terranian?" the man croaked, his voice barely more than a whisper. Crow's eyes widened in shock. "Who are you? How did you survive here?" "I am Captain Iron Valtis," the man said, his voice trembling. "I've been waiting centuries, I think. We fought them here, the unseen enemy. We tried to close the gateway, but we were too late. The station was our last stand." Crow felt a chill run down his spine. This man, this Terranian captain, had been trapped here all this time, suspended in some form of stasis, waiting for rescue that never came. The station wasn't just a relic. It was a tomb. "What do you know about the unseen enemy?" Crow asked, his voice urgent. "How did they reach us? What is their purpose?" Valta's eyes grew dark with fear. "They are older than you think, Admiral. They are not from this galaxy, not from this universe. They come from beyond the rifts, consuming, evolving. We sealed them away once, but they found a way back. This station, it was our last line of defense. A gatekeeper to keep them out." Before Crow could ask more, the station suddenly shuddered, alarms blaring throughout its halls. The dim lights flickered to life, and a deep, ominous hum reverberated through the walls. "They know you're here," Valtis said, panic rising in his voice. "They've activated the failsafe, the gateway. It's opening again." Crow turned to Lauren. "We need to get out of here. Warn the fleet." As the team raced back to the Phoenix, the ancient station began to pulse with dark energy. Space itself seemed to warp around the structure, a tear forming in the void like a wound in reality. A rift was opening, a doorway to the horrors that lay beyond. "Admiral, the unseen enemy is coming through the rift," Lauren shouted as they boarded the Phoenix. "We're detecting multiple ships, massive signatures." "All ships prepare for immediate engagement," Crow commanded, his voice echoing through the comms. "We're facing another invasion." Outside, the rift tore open wider, and the first of the enemy vessels emerged, larger and more terrifying than ever before. Their twisted forms glowed with the energy of the rift, their weapons crackling with lethal power. "This is no ordinary fleet," Crow said, his eyes narrowing. "This is their vanguard." The Phoenix's guns roared to life, and the battle began anew. As the galaxy's defenders braced for impact, Crow knew that this would be their toughest fight yet. The gateway had been breached, and the unseen enemy was pouring through, and the war for the fate of the galaxy had truly begun. The tear in space continued to widen, ripping the very fabric of reality apart as more and more vessels of the unseen enemy poured through the rift. These new ships were unlike anything Admiral Samuel Crow had faced before. Massive, organic monstrosities with writhing tendrils that seemed to drink in the energy of the rift. They pulsed with a dark, malevolent light, like creatures born of chaos itself. The fleet that emerged from the gateway dwarfed anything seen in the previous battles. These were not just raiding parties or scout forces. This was the vanguard of the unseen enemy, their spearhead meant to break the galaxy's defenses and pave the way for a full-scale invasion. "Admiral, we're facing overwhelming numbers," Captain Lauren shouted over the alarms blaring throughout the Phoenix. "Enemy vessels are locking onto our position, energy readings off the charts." Crow's eyes locked on the tactical display, which was now filled with the crimson signatures of enemy ships closing in from all directions. He could see the small, jagged icons representing his fleet scattered across the screen, hopelessly outnumbered and outgunned. "We're not retreating," Crow said, his voice steady despite the chaos. "We hold the line here. All ships focus fire on their lead vessels. We need to break their momentum before they overwhelm us." The Phoenix fired its primary cannons, unleashing a torrent of plasma beams and ion torpedoes at the nearest enemy warship. The beam sliced through the darkness of space, striking the twisted hull of the alien vessel. For a moment, it seemed like the attack would cripple the ship, but then the unthinkable happened. The enemy vessel absorbed the energy and redirected it back, amplifying the blast. "Incoming energy surge," Lauren shouted. "Brace for impact." The Phoenix shuddered violently as the redirected blast slammed into its shields, causing sparks to fly across the bridge. The force of the impact sent crew members stumbling, and warning lights flashed in rapid succession as systems began to overload. Crow gritted his teeth. "They're learning. They're using our own weapons against us again. We need to outthink them." As Crow barked orders to recalibrate their weapons, the attuned ships moved into position, their crystalline hulls glimmering with an ethereal light. The Anown had faced the unseen enemy before, and their weapons were designed to bypass the enemy's energy absorption. They fired a concentrated volley of crystalline shards that tore into the enemy ships, bypassing their defenses and fracturing their hulls. "Anown forces are holding their ground," Lauren reported, a note of hope in her voice. "They're cutting through the smaller vessels." But even as the Anown pressed their advantage, the larger enemy ships began to counterattack. They unleashed beams of twisted energy that rippled through space, striking Anown vessels with devastating force. Several of the crystalline ships shattered into glowing fragments, their light extinguished in the cold void. Crow watched as his fleet struggled to hold the line. The Alliance ships, though battered and depleted, fought with fierce determination, their cannons blazing in a desperate attempt to keep the enemy at bay. But the unseen enemy continued to press forward, relentless and unyielding. "Admiral, they're breaking through our right flank," one of the officers shouted. "We can't hold them much longer." Crow's mind raced. He needed a way to turn the tide, something the enemy wouldn't expect. "Divert power to the auxiliary thrusters," he ordered. "We're going to cut right through their formation." Lauren's eyes widened in surprise. "A direct charge, sir?" "It's our only chance to disrupt their lines," Crow said, determined in his voice. "If we can shatter their command structure, we might buy the fleet some time to regroup." The Phoenix roared forward, engines blazing as it accelerated toward the heart of the enemy formation. Other Terranian ships, inspired by their flagship's bold maneuver, followed suit, charging headlong into the chaos. The sudden move caught the unseen enemy off guard, their ships scrambling to reposition themselves in response. "Focus all fire on that central dreadnought," Crow commanded, pointing to the massive vessel at the center of the enemy line. It was larger than the others, its hull adorned with shifting, alien symbols that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. Crow knew that this ship was the key. It was the nerve center of the Vanguard's hive mind. The Phoenix's cannons unleashed a relentless barrage, and the combined firepower of the Terranian and Alliance vessels tore into the dreadnought's hull. The ship's dark exterior cracked and splintered under the assault, and for the first time, the enemy showed signs of vulnerability. "Direct hit," Lauren shouted. "We've breached their outer defenses." Crow seized the moment. "All ships, concentrate fire on the breach. Don't let up." Just as the fleet doubled down on their attack, the dreadnought unleashed a shockwave of energy, a desperate countermeasure that rippled through the battlefield. The blast slammed into the surrounding ships, sending several of them spiraling out of control. But the damage had already been done. The dreadnought's hull erupted in a series of explosions, its twisted form breaking apart from the inside. With the destruction of the command vessel, the enemy's coordination began to falter. The once perfectly synchronized ships moved erratically, their hive-mind connection weakened. "We did it!" Lauren shouted, her face lighting up with the first glimmers of hope. "They're losing cohesion." As the enemy forces began to retreat, the Allied fleet rallied, pressing their advantage. The Phoenix and the Unbeknownst vessels led the charge, cutting down the disoriented enemy ships before they could regroup. Alliance frigates and destroyers swarmed in, launching a final assault that tore through the remaining vessels of the unseen enemy. The battlefield fell silent, the last enemy ship vanishing into the rift from which it had emerged. The gateway's tear began to shrink, its edges flickering as the unstable energy collapsed upon itself. The threat was not fully eliminated, but for now, the vanguard had been turned back. Crow stood on the bridge, staring at the aftermath of the battle. The debris of shattered ships drifted through the darkness, a silent testament to the price they had paid. They had survived this encounter, but barely. And he knew that the full force of the unseen enemy still loomed on the other side of that rift. "Admiral," Lauren said quietly, breaking the silence. "We've received a message from Captain Iron Valtis. He wants to meet with you. He says he has information about the unseen enemy's true purpose, something he learned during the Exodus War." Crow turned to face her, his eyes narrowing with intrigue. "Tell him to come aboard. If he has answers, I want to hear them." In a private briefing room aboard the Phoenix, Captain Iron Valtis sat across from Crow, his eyes hollow and haunted. Though he was a man from another time, lost and out of place, there was a steely resolve in his gaze, a fire that had not been extinguished by the centuries. "Admiral Crow," Valtis began, his voice rough with exhaustion, "you need to understand the nature of the unseen enemy. They are not invaders looking to conquer. They are refugees, escaping something far worse than themselves." Crow's eyes narrowed. "Refugees? What are they running from?" Valtis took a deep breath, the weight of his words pressing down on him. "They come from a dying universe, a place where the laws of physics have broken down, where reality itself is collapsing. They consume and adapt not because they wish to, but because it is their only means of survival. And now they're trying to build a new home in our galaxy, no matter the cost." Crow felt a chill run down his spine. The unseen enemy wasn't just an aggressor. It was a force of desperation, fighting for its own survival in the only way it knew how. "If we don't find a way to stop them," Valtis continued, "they will consume everything. They will use our galaxy as a lifeboat to escape their own, tearing apart every world to fuel their existence." Crow stared at the ancient captain, a grim determination hardening his features. The stakes were higher than he'd ever imagined, but now he understood the true nature of their enemy. "They're not invincible," Crow said, his voice filled with a quiet, fierce resolve. "We'll find a way to stop them, no matter what it takes." As the Phoenix began preparations for the next phase of the war, Crow knew that their fight was no longer just a battle for survival. It was a battle for the very fabric of reality itself, against an enemy that had nothing left to lose. The briefing with Captain Iron Valtis had left Admiral Samuel Crow with more questions than answers. The revelation that the unseen enemy were refugees from a collapsing universe, desperately seeking a new home, had shifted the entire perspective of the war. This wasn't merely a battle for dominance, it was a struggle for survival on both sides. As the Phoenix made its way back to Zenvoria, the command deck was a flurry of activity. Engineers were assessing the damage from the recent battle, while communication officers coordinated with the remaining fleet to establish new defensive positions. Crow knew that every second counted. The enemy might have been pushed back for now, but they were far from defeated. "Admiral," said Captain Lauren, stepping onto the bridge with a datapad in her hand. Her face was drawn with a mixture of concern and determination. "We've just received an urgent transmission from the Anun High Command. They've requested an emergency summit with the Alliance Council. They believe it's time to discuss an alliance not just with the Anun, but with all other known galactic powers." Crow raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "A summit with who?" Lauren's voice held a trace of uncertainty. "They've also invited the Nari, the Kaldarian Coalition, and even the Khazal Imperium to join. They're calling for a united front against the unseen enemy." Crow's eyes narrowed. The Nari were a fiercely independent species, known for their mistrust of outsiders, while the Kaldarian Coalition had been embroiled in their own internal conflicts for years. As for the Khazal Imperium, one of the most technologically advanced but xenophobic civilizations in the galaxy, they were the last ones Crow expected to join hands in any cooperative effort. "The galaxy's powers, all in one room," Crow mused. "If we can unite them, we might just stand a chance against this threat." Lauren nodded. "But that's a big if, Admiral. There are centuries of mistrust and grudges to overcome, and they're not likely to put their differences aside so easily." "Then it's up to us to convince them," Crow said, determination hardening his voice. "We have to make them see that the only way to survive is to stand together." The summit was held on Zenvoria, in the Grand Council Hall, a vast chamber that had once been the center of the Galactic Alliance's power. Now it was filled with representatives from every major power in the galaxy. The air was charged with tension as envoys from the Anun, the Nari, the Kaldarian Coalition, and the Khazal Imperium faced each other across a massive round table. Crow stood at the head of the room, flanked by Captain Lauren and a delegation of Terranian officers. The murmurs from the gathered leaders echoed through the hall, centuries-old rivalries and suspicions simmering just below the surface. The Anun emissary, Tethan, was the first to speak. His voice was calm but firm, carrying the authority of a species that had seen the rise and fall of many civilizations. "Representatives of the galaxy, we have all faced the unseen enemy in isolation, and we have all suffered for it. We now face a choice. Either we unite to face this threat, or we fall, one by one, to its relentless advance." Across the table, Lord Varesh, the leader of the Khazal delegation, folded his arms, his eyes narrow and calculating. "And why should the Khazal Imperium trust any of you?" he said, his voice cold. "Our borders have remained untouched by this so-called enemy. We see no reason to risk our resources for a conflict that does not directly threaten us." A low murmur of agreement rippled through the Khazal delegates, but Senator Halleck of the Kaldarian Coalition quickly stood, his expression fierce. "That's exactly the kind of thinking that brought us to this brink," he said, his voice echoing in the hall. "We Kaldarians thought the same when the Grozilians attacked the outer colonies. We stayed out of it until they were at our doorstep, and by then, it was almost too late." The Nari representative, a tall figure with luminous eyes named General Zykan, nodded slowly. "Our scouts have encountered fragments of this enemy, remnants that adapt and grow stronger with each encounter," he said, his voice a low growl. "They are not just a threat to a single empire or race. They are a blight upon the galaxy itself." "Which is why we need to come together," Crow interjected, his voice cutting through the tension. "This isn't just about defending our individual borders. This is about survival. The unseen enemy doesn't care about your politics, your resources, or your grudges. They will consume everything in their path unless we unite against them." Baresh's eyes flashed with disdain. "And what proof do you offer, Terranian? Why should we believe that your motives are pure, that you aren't simply seeking to expand your influence under the guise of cooperation?" Crow felt the room's eyes on him, the skepticism and doubt weighing heavily. He took a deep breath, then turned to Captain Iron Valtis, who had been standing quietly in the shadows. "Captain Valtis, would you care to enlighten our guests?" Crow said. Valtis stepped forward, his voice steady despite the gravity of his words. "I've seen the true nature of the unseen enemy," he said. "They come from a universe that has already died, a place where the laws of reality have broken down. They are not just invaders, they are desperate beings, fleeing a cosmic cataclysm. They are looking to consume our galaxy to sustain themselves. A hush fell over the room. The leaders exchanged uneasy glances, the gravity of Valtus's words sinking in. Even Lord Varesh's stern expression seemed to falter. They will not stop, Valtus continued, because they cannot. If we do not stop them here, they will devour our galaxy as they have done to countless others. It won't matter how strong your fleets are or how advanced your technology is, they will find a way to adapt and overcome. For a moment there was silence. Then slowly, Tethon of the Anun spoke again. Our enemies have changed. We have faced them before long ago, and we survived by uniting the fractured powers of the time. This is a war that cannot be won alone. General Zykan of the Nari rose from his seat. The Nari will fight, he said, his luminous eyes blazing with determination. We will join this alliance. We know too well the price of facing such a threat alone. Senator Halleck nodded in agreement. The Caldarian coalition is with you, he said, looking directly at Crow. We've seen what happens when we let pride dictate our actions. This time, we will stand together. All eyes turned to Lord Varesh of the Khazal Imperium, who remained silent for a moment longer. Finally he stood, his expression guarded but resolute. Very well, he said slowly. The Khazal Imperium will lend its power to this alliance. But know this, we do so not out of trust but necessity. If you betray us, Terranian, there will be no mercy. Crow nodded, accepting the conditions. This alliance is not about trust, Varesh. It's about survival. Together, we will fight not just for our individual worlds, but for the survival of everything we hold dear. As the representatives returned to their seats, a sense of cautious optimism filled the chamber. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy's most powerful factions were setting aside their differences to stand united against a common foe. It was a fragile alliance, born of desperation and necessity, but it was a beginning. Crow turned to Lauren, a faint smile playing on his lips. We've done it, he said quietly. We've united the galaxy. Let's hope it's enough, Lauren replied, though there was a flicker of hope in her eyes. Because if this alliance fails, there won't be anything left to save. Crow knew she was right. The unseen enemy was still out there, lurking in the darkness, preparing for their next move. But now they would face not just scattered fleets and divided worlds, but the combined might of the galaxy. And for the first time, Crow allowed himself to believe that they might just have a chance to win this war. The Grand Alliance had been formed, a fragile unity forged in the fires of desperation. The fleets of the Terranians, Anun, Nari, Caldarian Coalition, and the Khazal Imperium now moved as one. The galaxy's most powerful civilizations were finally standing together, a vast armada ready to face the unseen enemy. Yet, as the days passed and preparations were made for the inevitable clash, Admiral Samuel Crow could feel the tension tightening like a coiled spring, waiting to snap. The Phoenix had become the nerve center of the Alliance's operations. Its corridors buzzed with activity as engineers, strategists, and diplomats from all corners of the galaxy filled its decks. The ship's strategic command center was a hive of glowing holoscreens and star charts, displaying the latest intelligence reports and fleet positions. Crow stood in the center of it all, surrounded by his officers and representatives from each of the allied forces. The room was filled with a mix of grim determination and barely concealed anxiety. The enemy's true strength was still unknown, and despite their combined might, the Alliance knew they were preparing to face an unimaginable force. "Admiral," said Captain Lauren, her expression tense as she approached with a datapad. "We've detected a significant spike in energy readings near the edge of the Lyran expanse. It's not just another scout force, it's massive." Crow's eyes sharpened, and he turned to the holographic display that showed a swirling mass of enemy signals gathering in the Lyran expanse, a region of space that had once been rich with star systems, now abandoned and stripped bare by the unseen enemy's advance. "This is it," Crow said, his voice steady. "The unseen enemy is massing their forces. They're preparing for a final assault on the galaxy." General Zykan of the Nari, his tall figure towering over the other representatives, nodded grimly. "This battle will decide the fate of us all," he growled. "We cannot afford to lose." Lord Varesh of the Khazal Imperium crossed his arms, his expression cold and calculating. The Imperium will hold nothing back, Crow. But remember, this alliance rests on a blade's edge. Fail us, and you will answer to more than just the unseen enemy. Crow met Varesh's gaze unflinchingly. We're all in this together, Varesh. If we fail, there won't be anyone left to answer to. As the Allied fleet made its way to the Lyran expanse, the mood among the crew was tense. Engineers worked tirelessly to ready the ships for battle, loading weapons, reinforcing hulls, and calibrating shields to handle the incoming storm. The mess halls were quieter than usual, filled with soldiers from every corner of the galaxy. Nari warriors sharpening their blades, Kaldarian strategists discussing last-minute maneuvers, Anan operatives whispering in their strange, musical language. Crow took a moment to walk through the lower decks of the Phoenix. Everywhere he looked, he saw the faces of those who had fought and bled to protect the galaxy. Some were young and filled with determination. Others bore the weary eyes of veterans who had seen too much death. They all shared the same look of grim resolve. He paused as he reached the ship's hangar, where a lone figure was working on a sleek, advanced fighter, its wings adorned with the glowing sigils of ancient Terranian craftsmanship. It was Captain Iran Valtis, the man who had been a ghost from the past, now thrust into the heart of this battle for the future. "Admiral," Valtis said, wiping his hands on a rag as he looked up. "You've come to check on the old soldier?" Crow gave a small, wry smile. "I came to see if you were ready to join us in the fight, Captain. You've been through more than most. I wanted to know how you feel about facing them again." Valtis's face grew serious, his eyes dark with memories of a war that had never truly ended for him. "This time, we have something we didn't before," he said. "A chance. Back then, we were alone, fighting a force we didn't understand. Now we stand together, the strongest forces of the galaxy united. That's something even the unseen enemy will have to reckon with." Crow nodded, appreciating the hard-won hope in Valtis's words. "We'll need every edge we can get. The unseen enemy adapts faster than anything we've seen. But this time, we have a plan." As Crow made his way back to the command center, the communications officer called out, "Admiral, we're receiving a transmission. It's from the Lyran expanse, a distress signal. It's weak, but it's encoded with the same Terranian frequency we picked up before." "Patch it through," Crow ordered, a sense of urgency rising in him. The holoscreen flickered to life, showing a distorted image of a planet scarred by battle. The signal was filled with static, but a voice cut through, a voice Crow recognized. It was Captain Valtis, but from a time long past, a message recorded centuries ago. "This is Captain Aaron Valtis of the Terranian 7th Fleet," the voice said, filled with the desperation of a man who knew he was facing his end. "The enemy has breached our defenses. We've activated the failsafe, but they're stronger than we imagined. To whoever finds this, do not underestimate them. They will stop at nothing. They are coming for everything." The message cut off, and silence fell over the room. Crow felt a chill run down his spine. Valtis's warning from the past echoed the grim reality they faced now, a battle that would determine the fate of not just their galaxy, but perhaps the entire universe. "We have to stop them here," Crow said, his voice filled with a quiet but fierce determination. "We cannot allow them to reach the core worlds. The galaxy's future depends on this battle." The Allied fleet dropped out of hyperspace, arriving at the edge of the Lyran expanse. Before them lay a sight that would have struck fear into the heart of any seasoned warrior. A massive armada of the unseen enemy, ships stretched across the stars like a black tide. In their midst was a structure that dwarfed even the largest dreadnoughts, a colossal command vessel glowing with the malevolent energy of the rift. Crow turned to the gathered leaders of the Allied fleet, Tethon of the Anaun, General Zycon of the Nari, Senator Halek of the Kaldarian Coalition, and even Lord Varesh of the Khazal Imperium. Each of them looked to Crow, waiting for his command. "We strike at the heart," Crow said, pointing to the massive command vessel. "That ship is the key. It's their nexus, the core of their hive mind. If we destroy it, we break their control over the fleet. They'll be thrown into chaos." "And if we fail?" Lord Varesh asked, his voice a cold whisper. "Then we die fighting," Crow answered without hesitation. "But we die together, fighting for every life in this galaxy." The leaders nodded, each of them understanding the gravity of the moment. This was not just a battle for survival. It was a stand against oblivion itself. "All ships, this is Admiral Samuel Crowe," he said into the fleet-wide comm channel, his voice strong and clear. "Today, we face an enemy unlike any we've seen, but we are not alone. We are the united force of every star system, every world, every race in this galaxy. Today, we stand as one." The Phoenix led the charge, its engines roaring as the Allied fleet surged forward into Laran expanse. Plasma beams, energy blasts, and crystalline projectiles lit up the darkness. The fury of the galaxy's defenders unleashed in a storm of light and fire.
If you like this story, please press the like button and subscribe. It encourages me to write more stories. Thank you.